All right, good morning, everyone. Could you please take your seats? Shree, if you'll go ahead and close the door as well. We're just about to get started. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending today's session. I'm happy to introduce Scott Welle, who will be presenting Becoming a Superhero with Peak Performance Training. Let me tell you just a little bit about Scott. Outperforms are not born, they're made. We all have the capacity to lead others and raise our game. And Scott Welle has spent more than 15 years helping people do this, personally and professionally. He has authored 9 best-selling books, has a master's degree in sports psychology, is an adjunct professor at St. Olaf University, and regularly consults with top-performing business leaders and athletes, all with one common goal: to outperform the norm. For fun, and because he's a little crazy, he's completed 5 Ironman triathlons, 29 marathons, and 100-mile ultramarathon run.
Y'all think I'm crazy, I know it.
He serves others by showing them how to tap into the same mindset of challenging their self-limiting beliefs and aspiring to be their best every day. Before we get started, I do have a couple of housekeeping items. I do want to just remind everyone to keep their phones on silent until the presentation is over. Also, we would greatly appreciate if you could fill out the survey in the app. If you're needing anything about PDUs, it's all in the app. And at the end, I'll provide a reminder as well. I already told everyone to keep their seats during the duration. We cannot have anyone standing up. So thanks so much, and here's Scott Welle.
All right, thank you. I've got okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. You can do a little bit better than that, come on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right. Always sensitive to being the late morning breakout speaker where the morning caffeine is starting to wear off a little bit, and I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. But for the next hour, I'm going to bring as much energy as I possibly can, and I ask that you try to match that with me. And when we talk about becoming a superhero with peak performance training, what I need you to do is I need you to use your imagination on a lot of these things, because I have no idea what brings you here right now and how you look at peak performance as a term, but when I will talk about some of my background in working with athletes, as well as, believe it or not, how that relates to superheroes and how you can use it to be able to raise your own game or for you to be able to outperform. But I'm not going to have a 2x2 matrix. I don't do a lot of process. It's not my strength. But I am going to talk to you about the psychology and the behavioral characteristics of, if you really want to achieve and have peak performance, what are the things that you need to do? So let's go into, first off, my company is called Outperform the Norm. And I never stand up here. I've never done a speech with a podium in my life, so I will be traveling around as I speak. But when we talk about outperforming, I always like to just frame it and let people know where I'm coming from when it comes to outperform. And if you look at the definition of it, it's to surpass in excellence of performance or to do better than. Now, if you look at that, if you heard it in my bio, my master's degree was in sports psychology. If you don't know what sports psychology is, it's the psychology of working with elite and professional level athletes on the goal setting, the focus, the confidence, the resiliency, the routines, the grit, the getting in the zone, those different things to be able to train and be able to compete at that highest level. And again, you might kind of be saying, well, what the heck does that have to do with me as a project manager? Right? Well, what you actually come to realize is a lot of the same set of skills and principles that allow athletes to be successful are the same things that will allow us to be successful as well. So when I first started learning about sports psychology and really looking at high achievement and how outperformers are wired, when I was getting my master's degree, we learned in terms of two different types of what we call orientations. And the first orientation, if we look at people that really achieve great things, whether we're talking about athletics or business or anything else, the first orientation is what we call an ego orientation. And the ego orientation is basically me against you. Like you heard I've done some races. It means if we're running in a race together, I'm trying to outperform or surpass an excellence of performance relative to someone else kind of next to me. And businesses, a lot of them are kind of framed this way as well, right? Where you're looking out at the competitive landscape of your industry and you're saying, how can I gain a competitive advantage in what I'm doing? And you can look at it, are high achievers wired with a certain amount of kind of that ego orientation, maybe me against you, and I want to surpass an excellence of performance relative to the other person? Yeah, they are. But the part that I'm really so passionate about and what outperforming I think is all based upon is the second thing. And it's really what we call a mastery orientation. Mastery orientation, as simplistic as it sounds, is just how do I strive to become the best version of me? Like, how do I be just a little bit better today than I was yesterday? How could I be a little bit better tomorrow than I am today? And you're driven by that intrinsic pursuit of growth and kind of development. And interestingly enough, if you usually focus on just what do I need to do to be able to have peak performance, to be a superhero and to be able to show up as the best version of myself, usually if you have that kind of orientation looking inward, the outward stuff kind of takes care of itself on the competitive landscape, let's say. So when we go into this, a lot of what we're going to talk about is sports psychology and specifically mindset. And it's straight out of my book, Outperform the Norm. And I'm going to open this up to the crowd. I realize we have quite a few people packing the house here today. But to stack up the norm and outperform next to each other, I always like to ask the open-ended question to the audience, how many thoughts do you think the average person has every single day? If you were to just raise your hand and just guess something, what do you think it is? Go ahead in the back. Just a little bit less, a little less than 200,000, a little less than 90,000. Any other guesses?
3.
Is that you? Is it 3? Yeah.
That was the first one.
You got more than 3. Come on. So it's actually about 50,000 thoughts a day. And lots of studies will validate this. We have a lot of thoughts swirling through our heads every single day as project managers and as everything else. Now, part of the reason that I'm talking about this is of those 50,000 thoughts, what percentage of them do you think are negative? Again, raise your hand and just shout it out. 75, 70, I think I might have heard an 80. It is actually 80%. Or now you're all outperforming project managers, so you might be a little bit less than that, but the fact of the matter is when we look out at just kind of the landscape of, I think, psychology in general and what we're saying to ourselves every single day, if 4 out of every 5 thoughts, or that 80%, are negative, it has a massive impact on actually what we do. And here's the bottom line of psychology, of sports psychology, of life psychology, of everything else. It's the fact that our thoughts will affect our feelings, which will affect our behaviors. And whether it's you or whether maybe it's been a team member or something, or it could even be a son or daughter. Like if you've ever just wondered from a behavioral standpoint, like I don't know why I just can't get this person to take this action or to continue kind of doing this behavior, doing this thing. Well, what actually precedes that, believe it or not, physiological emotions going on throughout your nervous system. And what precedes that is just the basis of what we're saying to ourselves every single day. So I always like to just put this up here. And I didn't create any handouts for this presentation, and that was very purposeful, because as I go through, I think this is a hybrid of my presentation, the 5 C's of legendary leadership, but it's 5 different things that go into really peak performance training to becoming a superhero with it. what I really want you to think about is I just want you to let that imagination run wild, and I want you to jot down some things as far as how it relates to exactly where you are right now, personally and professionally, to be able to get better results. And that first one, the NordiTrack machine. The first one is to commit. All of the 5 things are still C's. I still do alliterations like that. But the first one is just a basic commitment. Like, how do you want to show up every single day? And I think it has to be an active, conscious choice, because if you don't really think about how am I committed to showing up, then the universe is going to kind of choose that for you. And we all know what it can be like. Maybe you walk into the office and the storm is going on, if things are going awry with your project, or team members are being negative, or budgets are getting cut, deadlines aren't being met, and then all of a sudden it just shapes your entire day from there, rather than I'm going to consciously commit and anchor in how I want to show up. So in a second, I'm going to have you turn to the person to your left or right and to just share what one word or what one leadership trait would be that you've learned in your life as far as how you want to show up. But I have a NordiTrack machine on here for a reason. I remember back, it's very interesting how and where we learn our leadership lessons throughout the course of our lives. And I think back to like when I was playing high school football. I split time between Denver and Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't know if you're getting any of the Minnesota accent, like if any of you have picked up on that, but I grew up in a small town called Albany, Minnesota. Population 1,701. Graduating class was about 100 people, but a very small town, but we had one heck of a good football program in high school. And it was interesting because our coach would always open up the weight room before school would start. He would open it up at 6 a.m. And even though we had a really good football team, we would never have more than maybe a handful of people show up. So he certainly didn't need to open it up because it's not like the whole team was in there in the in-season or in the off-season. But every time I would go in there, I would lift weights before school, he would be in there and he would be doing, if any of you kind of, I don't know if they still make them, the NordiTrack machine, but he'd be in there and he'd be doing his workout. He wouldn't be doing what we were doing, squats and bench and things like that, but he'd be doing the NordiTrack and he'd be doing his own workout. And because I saw him doing that, it got ingrained in me that I will never, ever, ever ask someone to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. It was a powerful lesson in leadership. Like he could have just opened up the weight room and I guess and gone and sat in his office or done something else, but the fact that he was at least doing what he could do, now all of a sudden when he asked me to do something, I was like, yeah, coach, I'll do that, because I saw him leading by example. So it's just a character trait and something that when I really look at how I want to show up every single day, I want to do that and I want to lead by example. And this is where, again, it's very interesting where we learn our leadership lessons because they are completely individual, but what I'm most curious about is if you were to just identify and name one leader, somebody that's had an impact on you, either personally or professionally, that you say, I want to show up and I want to be committed to doing this, regardless of what is happening in my personal or professional life, what would that look like? So let's take just 1 or 2 minutes, turn to the person to your left or right, let's keep the energy up, and just share. What's one leadership trait that really holds value for you that you want to own? Go ahead. Okay, can we start bringing back in, please? Settle down, class, settle down. Based on Daniel Pink, I'm going to start calling you all salespeople. Salespeople can never stop talking. So, would anybody like to volunteer? Can we get 1 or 2 volunteers on just what a character trait is for leadership and why that's important to you? Bueller? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Accountability. Why is that important to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, accountability, huge thing. Absolutely. Who else? Yes, sir. Competence. Okay. Why is that important trait for you?
Well, it's not going to work with somebody or have somebody tell me what to do if they don't actually know what is going on. If there's this empty suit or something directing to do something or other.
Uh-huh.
You show that they're competent of doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Sage advice. Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Anybody over here? We'll get one more. Thank you.
I said being a role model.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that it's like holding a space and demonstrating good practices.
Mm-hmm.
And then Matt, my partner here, calling out. He said
Thanks.
having a personal connection, which I also really like.
Okay, having a personal connection.
Like connecting with
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah. And so was that a great leader that you had in your life that personally connected with you? Or why is that important to you?
Well, it made me feel like they cared about me on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to do more for that person.
Yeah. Because interestingly enough, I asked this question to a lot of different groups. It can be leadership teams, it can be project managers, it can be sales groups. And again, we learn things in a lot of different areas in our life. And some of the leadership things and what we take with us, it can either be an experience where we had a great leader that maybe taught us accountability or taught us personal connection, and you say, I am going to commit and live my life that way. Or I would bet I could turn you loose to talk to the person next to you, and you all probably have stories of horrible leaders that you've had in your life where you say, no matter what, I will never show up like that. And the interesting thing about it, we're not even going to go there because I need to stay tight on time, but the thing about it is, again, to come back to that word commit, the first C, and I think if you get nothing else out of it, the commitment to how you want to show up every single day, I just think it's so important for you to actively do that. And you don't need it when we walk outside of here and it's 75 degrees and sunny and no wind outside and everything is perfect. You need it when the scope of a project has changed or deadlines aren't being met, budgets are being cut, stakeholders aren't happy, things like that. When you have the storm swirling around you, that's where you actually have to anchor back in that accountability, that competence, that personal connection, all those different things. I just think it's so key for how we live our lives. Number 2 is consistency. The second C is consistency. Now, Minnesota guy, Joe Mauer was a hometown guy of ours, just retired last year. Going to get into the Hall of Fame, but I show baseball players up here sometimes for a very specific reason. For any of you that are baseball fans, you know that they play 162 games every year, right? Like it's a lot of baseball games. And sometimes, especially around when we look at peak performers and when we think of that, it's kind of the myth of motivation. Like we think that these peak performers and these high achievers are just motivated all the time. Well, they're actually not. Like whether we're talking about a Rockies player or a Twins player or anybody else, do you think that they are motivated for every single 162 games that they have to play every year, in addition to every practice that they need to go to? No, absolutely not. But they find a way to cultivate the habits and the routines and the disciplines to be able to consistently show up. It's also why I don't always like the term peak performance, because you hear peak performance, you think about like a mountain, like a Pikes Peak or something, where you hit like the peak and then you drop off. And I think if what I actually really subscribe to more and the way that I look at peak performance is I want sustained high performance or sustained peak performance. And that can only really happen if we're showing up consistently. So to go into this as far as routines go, there's a concept I love talking about called the vital 4%. And if you don't know, 4% is not a big chunk of time, but it's 1 hour of your day, right? And I'm a huge believer that the hardest part of anything in life is just getting started, right? And like once you get the ball rolling in a positive direction, it continues to just kind of go from there. So when we look at that vital 4%, if you were going to really own that part of the day and really set the tone for an outperforming day, what do you think are some of the most important things that you could do either personally or professionally in that vital 4% to set the tone for an outperforming day? What do you think some of those things are? Yes, sir. What's that? Focus. Yep. What are you focusing on? Okay. So is that visualization? Or you mean more focusing on tasks that you need to do? Or listening? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's not a right and a wrong answer. Hey, you can go a lot of different ways. Is your hand up?
Yes. Just taking time to sit and think.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We get so much information in and so many things we have to decide.
Yeah.
That just taking that time to just sit and think
Yeah. Yeah.
is important.
Yeah. That thinking. I mean, duh. I haven't said it yet, but when I talk about a lot of these things, you might look at it and you might say, well, that just sounds painfully obvious. But one of the sayings that I live by and that I ask myself quite often is, common sense is not always common practice. So when you're looking at these things, it's great if you know it, but are you actually doing it? Sometimes that can be another can of worms. So good, okay, what else do we got? Mm-hmm. Yep, set, check your goals, what you want to accomplish for the day. What else do we have, personally or professionally? Prepare, okay, how would you prepare? Mm-hmm.
During the winter time, I was training in the morning or
Mm-hmm.
for an hour in the rollers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super painful to wake up. What I did is I had my cycling shoes and my clothes were ready,
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't have to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, sounds pretty simple, right? So exercise, too, is important for you.
And for a meeting, I just have notes or whatever I need. Just make sure you look at these 5 things prior to the meeting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And
yeah,
that sets up.
yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Good, really good.
First thing is wake up and make your bed.
Wake up and make your bed. You know what the purpose of making your bed is? Why that's so important?
I mean, if that day comes back or at least have something accomplished, comes back.
Yeah. It's the whole basic premise of making your bed. A lot of you have probably seen it, but the whole make your bed thing kind of, I don't know if you could say it went viral, but it was a commencement address by Admiral William McRaven, where he went in there and he was talking to, I think it was University of Texas at Austin, but he had his whole commencement based on making your bed. And this is a guy that I think directed Navy SEALs and things like that, but it was the basic premise of you make your bed, first thing in the morning, like you start out the day with a win, something small, and you've already accomplished something right off the bat, and then you can just kind of go from there. So we could stay on this for a while, but if I were to just boil it down into what I think are 4 great things that we can all do, the first one is just simply an attitude of gratitude. And it could go in with thoughts as well, depending on what you're thinking about, but more and more studies are coming out that show that the highest performers almost always have the highest amounts of gratitude. Like they just do. And instead of looking at maybe what's not going right, the things that are changing, what you don't have, it's looking at your life in abundance and thinking about what do I have and what am I grateful for and what do I have gratitude for in my life. Studies have actually shown you can level up your amount of happiness and fulfillment in life by up to 30% with just simple intentional acts of gratitude. Gratitude journal, doing something nice for someone, it makes a massive difference. Second thing, I actually think fueling your body, putting some good nutrition into your body is absolutely key, especially out here at altitude. Water is a big deal. Hydration is huge to high performance. If you're a little bit dehydrated, it will affect you mentally, physically, bless you, as well as emotionally. Exercise is If we were to just go around the room, exercise is the single greatest performance enhancer for our lives, mentally, physically, emotionally. Nothing else, no pill, nothing else that we can do can replicate the physical, mental, emotional benefits that we get from exercise. Yet again, and I'm speaking to myself here, common sense not always being common practice. Do we do that all the time? I mean, if we really want to perform at our peak, the big things with, I know as project managers, you're probably under a tremendous amount of stress from time to time, right? One of the biggest things with exercise is it's great for stress management, right? Yet one of the things we will tell ourselves is really stressed out right now, like really have a lot going on, can exercise, rather than looking at it as, no, this is actually something that I need to do to buffer what I'm doing, professionally speaking. And then the last thing would be, it's part of the reason that I asked you, sir, what you meant by focus and by visualization, because you read my mind on this one. I do think focusing on what are the most important things, the stuff that matters and the stuff you can control. Again, as simple as it sounds. All of the goal setting work that I do with athletic teams or with businesses is based on taking something. You can look at projects exactly the same way because they're based on outcomes, right? And deliverables. And as much as we really want to believe that we can control these things, we typically can't. We can't control those outcomes. All we can do is to really peel it back and to break it down. And I think if you were to just spend the first 5 to 10 minutes, I think it was Brian Tracy that said every minute spent planning saves 10 minutes in execution. But just spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes in thought of like, what are the most important things that I need to do today and I need to accomplish? Man, you're just so far ahead of everybody else if you just do that. But it does actually require sometimes a little bit of conscious thought. And I think it's a little bit of what Daniel Pink was talking about as well. I can't remember how he said it, but it was basically we have unlimited access to information, I think, but taking the information and actually curate in a way that's usable, I think that's exactly what he was talking about, like what matters most and what should we focus on. So that's consistency. Number 3, connect to a purpose. Now the interesting part of this is if we just look at any superheroes, right? Like superheroes have big, bold, audacious purposes. You know, they need to save mankind. Batman needs to save Gotham. Like they have these tremendous tasks and these tremendous purposes for what they do that then drives their peak performance on a day in and day out basis. A lot of athletes are wired exactly the same way. They're actually playing for some type of legacy, or their psychology is they're thinking about something greater than themselves. The example I will sometimes give has to do with, how many of you have ever flown Southwest Airlines? I flew in on Southwest yesterday. And I mean, I love the free peanuts, free pretzels, and water, and unique boarding process, and the transparency, I think, as they call it. But if you look at the mission of Southwest Airlines, it's to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. And if you look at that, okay, what's the most important part of that mission? Well, it's not really the friendly or the reliable or the low-cost air travel. What all of Southwest Airlines is based around is connecting people to what's important in their lives. And I think you feel that. I know that I feel it because I've flown a lot of different airlines before, and it just seems like culturally speaking, whether I'm talking to someone at the check-in counter, or it's the flight attendant, or it's the pilot, or it's someone on customer service, they seem to just operate differently. And if you look on their website and what they do, it's all about stories of them connecting people to what's important in their lives. Like, I think about it, this was just a couple of weeks ago. I was back in Minnesota and I was doing a training for a chain of dental offices. And I just asked them the question. I said, what is it that you do here? I said, well, we do teeth cleaning, we do teeth whitening, we do crowns and fillings, surgeries, et cetera. And I said, okay, those are the services that you provide. But I said, what is it that you actually do here? I said, well, we kind of thought about it a little bit. Take away pain, maybe, help people with smiles, things like that. I said, okay, so what are you actually doing for people? And when you strip it down to that most basic kind of fundamental layer of, I think, well-being and just mankind, like that is where your powerful purpose actually precedes motivation in a lot of ways. And of course, for a dental office, I mean, you're giving people basically the gift of health and the gift of life with what you're doing. I mean, you have a tremendous impact on all of those things, because if I'm in pain or if I don't feel good about my smile, how much is that going to interact or impact, I should say, every single thing that I'm doing on a daily basis? So when you look at this, you know, if we were to just sit down and we're having a coffee after this or we're having a beer later or something, and I were to ask you what it is that you do, you would probably say something like, I do teeth whitening, I do teeth cleaning, so on and so forth, I work for this company. But then if I strip that down and if I said, what is really what you're doing when you peel back that onion, that is how you get people to buy into that powerful purpose of what it is that you're doing. And when that purpose becomes powerful, and trust me, we all have it, it's what they call raising necessity in peak performance psychology. It actually becomes a non-negotiable thing, where on the days that you don't really feel like showing up as your best, you say, I actually have to show up as my best because my purpose is driving it and these people are relying on me. So when you look at this, for those of you that are taking notes, what I always like to reference is, I imagine some of you are familiar with HBR, Harvard Business Review. They actually did a study on what makes good pep talks, right? And when you hear the term pep talk, you probably think of like Hollywood movies, like you got Herb Brooks coming in Miracle, or you've got, you know, football movie or something like that where you're coming in, you're kind of doing the rah-rah, and that's not what I'm talking about. They actually did a study of pep talks in people that are really effective communicators to be able to kind of inspire others to be able to raise their game and play at a higher level. And they basically identified 3 components that all good pep talks, whether it's for leadership group, sales team, project managers, anything else, 3 different things that they have. And the first one is that they give some type of direction. It's like the coach giving the X's and O's, but it's basically, remember, this is what's important right now. This is what we're going after. These are kind of the tactics and I think the logical stuff and the strategies. Like it's the direction giving part. Second one is to demonstrate empathy. Now I actually think this ties in perfectly with what Dan Pink was talking about. It was attunement, right? Which I hadn't actually heard that word before. But attunement is basically, it was a principle of highly effective people too, right? Seek to understand, then to be understood. Like we have a deep fundamental actually need as humans to want to feel like people understand us and people know what it's like to walk in our shoes. So I think some demonstration of empathy as far as, I know how hard you're working, I know this is difficult with limited resources, I get that the scope of this project has changed, maybe different things like that, but a relatability and I get what it's like to walk in your shoes is a tremendously powerful thing. And then the third one is some type of meaning-making language, which is exactly what I was talking about before. It's some type of connection back to what is the end goal or the end outcome of why we're doing this? Very easy to lose sight of it, but very important in terms of inspiring communication, I think, and inspiring others. And I will typically use it as just a checklist for me from time to time. Whether it's you're leading a meeting or you're sending an email or anything else, do I have those 3 components? Like, am I giving some type of direction as far as what's most important right now? Am I demonstrating some type of empathy that I know what it's like to be you? And then am I also tying it in with why this matters? You do those three things, I promise you're going to connect better to a purpose, and you're going to have more effective communication as leaders. Number 4, Batman. We're going to thrive through change. Now, if you watch any superhero movie, it's not always roses and rainbows, right? Where just everything's great for the superhero from start to finish. Sort of like you've probably never had a product or a project from start to finish that has gone off, without a hitch and without any hiccups in it. Well, it's the same exact thing that when we look at change, it's just inevitable. So to throw it back to you, why do we hate change so much? Like, what is it about change that we just hate? Can't control it. Who said that? Yeah? Can't control it, right? What else we got?
The unknown.
What's that?
The unknown.
The unknown? Yeah, certainly. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Creatures of habit.
We are certainly creatures of habit. Yeah. Throws us off of our routines. All of these things are absolutely true. And there is certainly a biological component to change that I always put this up here. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So the interesting thing of change, and it is the one universal thing that I hear from every company, business, organization that brings me in to speak or to work with them, is something to the effect of, we're going through a lot of change right now and some of our people are kind of struggling to get on board or kind of struggling to deal with it. And the reason that I put this up here is because if we actually look at change and if we go back to the biology of why we hate change, it actually threatens us on our most basic level, like dating way back thousands upon thousands of years, where if something is changing out in the environment, we perceive it as threatening to our physiology or our existence as a species. So it's actually a completely natural reaction for everyone to be a little bit resistant to change, but there are certainly some things that you can do about it. Usually what I recommend is what we just call the simple ARCO strategy. Now, ARCO, if you don't know it, the first A, it's an acronym, is acknowledge the change. Common sense not always being common practice. This is easier said than done. Our perception of things is so massively important in every single thing that we do. You heard that I taught a couple of years at St. Olaf University. It's a small college in Minnesota. You may be familiar. But I remember teaching that, and I would oftentimes show a TED Talk talking about stress and the research behind it. And stress related to nerves, related to pressure, related to change. Like, the biggest factor in stress management and how you deal with that stress is simply your perception of it. And studies have actually shown if you perceive stress as, or change as, this shouldn't be happening to me, why is this happening to me, and think that you're not prepared for it, it will actually take years off of your life. Versus, well, I don't necessarily like that this is happening, but I know that I have the ability and the strength to be able to get to the other side of it. I'll give you an example from my life. How many of you have ever run a marathon or know someone that's run a marathon? Okay, so all of you, either individually or someone else that you know, have probably heard the term the wall, right? As it relates to the marathon. It's kind of this like, because it doesn't really exist, there's no physiological evidence that shows that it always happens at mile 20 or 21 or anything else. But I've spoken with enough runners throughout the course of my time to know that there's a distinct difference between going out and running the race and saying, I hope I don't go through any adversity, I hope nothing changes, I hope I don't hit the wall, and then inevitably, when you have some adversity or something happens and you hit the wall, you now don't know how to deal with it. Versus, I'm going to go out and I'm going to run my race. I don't necessarily want to hit that wall, but if I hit that wall, I know that this is what I'm going to do about it. It's a shift in the lens and the perspective with which you see things. And it's massively important. So that's the A. The R is to reduce or to remove as much uncertainty as possible. It's just basically if there's any change going on, we feel better. Somebody talked about the unknown, the uncertainty, whatnot. Anything that you can do to gather information about the change that is happening, and this is a strategy that can help professionally as well as personally. You can use this same exact strategy. Anything that you can do to remove or reduce any amount of uncertainty is going to make you feel more secure on that biological level and is going to help you to move forward. C is to connect with others, whether it's you or I or a superhero. Sometimes when there's change going on or there's things happening, you need to connect with other people that can either help you with the change to still be able to get what you want, or other people that are experiencing the change in the same way. Batman would connect with Alfred, I think, and superheroes connect with other people to be able to help them get to the other side. And then the O in the ARCO is to just outline a future game plan. It's just those 4 things. After you've done this, after you acknowledge that this change is happening, it's not going away, I need to get to the other side, then you remove or reduce as much uncertainty as possible and you connect with others. Then you just chart, how can I still be able to get what I want? If we're talking about athletics, if the Avs end up winning the Stanley Cup, or the Rockies win the World Series, or Broncos win the Super Bowl, like, none of those are going to go perfectly start to finish. Things are going to happen, and they would go through some amount of these same exact strategies to be able to make it to the other side. So that's the change part. Last part, Superman. Power posture. Christopher Reeve, right? Yeah. Number 5 is to be courageous. And I'll be completely honest with you. I've been thinking about this all morning, ever since listening to Dan Pink talk about power and talk about how it reduces our ability to see the perspective of others. So I would love to actually debate this with him, because I'm going to talk you through some things when it comes to the first aspect of, if you want to show up as a peak performer and as the absolute best version of yourself, it is actually a very heroic and a very courageous act. Like, you have to be willing to almost bare your soul and put yourself out there to do it. And you might not necessarily look at yourself that way as a project manager, but it's probably the difference from operating where you are now to being able to get to that next level. And one of the first things that I always talk about, believe it or not, is the importance of posture. If you've ever seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, kind of revolves around that. But I'll throw it back from an athletic front. How many of you have sons or daughters that play sports? All right. If you're watching them play in their game or competition and they make a mistake or they really screw something up, like, what is their posture? Is their head up or is their head down? Probably down, right? Are their shoulder blades hunched forward or are they back? Hunched forward a little bit. Are they kind of down from the hips or are they standing up tall? They're probably down a little bit like this, right? Sort of like the biology we talked about with change, it's a natural human reaction. And coming from where I come from, Minnesota, you can very easily look at it and we can take a Minnesota kicker. This is the story of the Minnesota Vikings. Dan Carlson, you got cut last year, sorry about that. And while we're at it, we're going to poke a little bit of fun for any Green Bay Packers fans too with Mason Crossbar. And if there are any Chicago Bears fans in the house, you're not getting away unscathed either. We'll show Cody Parkey as well. But do you think, like, Mike Zimmer, head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, told Daniel Carlson, like, if you do something really bad, I want you to just do one of these? Like, do you think that's something they work on in practice? Like, no, it's just something that we actually instinctively do. And believe it or not, when we look at it, it's not that much different than how we spend a tremendous portion of our lives, kind of clenched up in this what we would call a closed off posture. And you think about like the antidote to that and what we do when we actually feel great. See, I will celebrate your hometown heroes, right? I don't think anybody told John Elway, like, if you win the Super Bowl, you need to have your head up, you need to have your shoulder blades back, you need to throw your arms up in the air. Like, I doubt anybody told him to do that. Okay, so you're sitting there saying, from a posture standpoint, okay, Scott, well, what are you telling me, that I need to just stand here like this in my meetings, or I need to start walking around like this every time that I see people? You can do that. People might look at you a little bit strange if you do, but believe it or not, subtle tweaks in our posture have a massive impact on how we feel from time to time. And this is the interesting thing. When I was hearing Daniel Pink talk about power and how when we think we're more powerful, we will actually lose the perspective of others, I don't know the research behind that, but I would never, ever, ever tell somebody in business or in athletics to suppress their own power. And I think the two can still work together, because believe it or not, a lot of you, I'm sure, know different stats on communication. Like, it's not really just the words that are coming out of your mouth. A huge amount of it is your tonality as well as your body language. So I just think the simple act of, if you all subscribe to, I am in sales and I am selling a project, let's say, or I am selling a budget or something like that, if you subscribe to that, well, a huge amount of our influences, I've written a couple of books on sales. People will always buy you before they buy your project or program or idea of service. And then it's just, if you are actually standing up, sitting up tall, and people see you that way, they won't even necessarily know why they want to follow you, but they'll say, I kind of want what that person has. Like, I want to follow them. Versus, I don't think anybody is going to want to follow this, right? I just don't think so. So the last thing that I want to talk about, and you're really going to have to, this goes hand in hand with being courageous. You're really going to have to let your imagination run with this one, because I'm telling you, all peak performers do this. I've seen it in athletics as well as business, is the creation of an alter ego. How many of you have heard of the term alter ego? Okay, well, I'm glad you've actually all heard of it. That's really, really good, because it's a tremendously powerful thing. And what an alter ego is basically Superman, Clark Kent, steps into a phone booth, puts on his tights and his cape, and he steps out as Superman. Bruce Wayne goes into the Batcave, puts on his bat suit, comes out, and he's Batman. It's basically you're stepping up and you're creating an enhanced version of yourself to be able to handle the specific tasks and demands with which you might not feel comfortable. And I don't care who it is, every single person, I mean, if we can just be very real about it, so much of our psychology and how we operate today was shaped before we even really had a say in the matter. It was shaped by our nurture, and it was shaped by things that happened to us very early on. And it can be something like you're going out and you're kind of wondering in the back of your head, well, I wonder what people are going to say. I wonder what people are going to think. And when you're doing that, you're not fully expressing the best version of yourself. So that's when you actually break into some kind of alter ego or something like that that rids you of the judgments and the worries and the fears. I will give you a couple of examples. How many of you remember the athlete Bo Jackson, right? Bo knows, right? One of the greatest athletes of all time. Pretty sure he's the only guy that's been an all-star in both baseball and football. Heard an interview with him recently that they were talking to him about this, the concept of an alter ego. And he said, you know, that's actually really interesting because Bo Jackson's never played a down of football in his life. The person said, okay, well, that's a little bit interesting. Like, tell me a little bit more about that. And this is probably going to sound really weird, but sort of like I referenced before, where a lot of these things are brought into existence before we even know what's going on. He had a tough childhood, and he got into trouble a lot, and he was hyper aggressive a lot of times. So he actually, if any of you have ever seen the Friday the 13th movies with Jason in the hockey mask, he actually started to use Jason as his alter ego on the football field for the simple reason that he wanted to go out there and he not only wanted to be cold-blooded as far as how he did things, but he wanted to be very calculated in what he was doing. He didn't want to lose control. So that was an example of his alter ego. Some of you, I guarantee you've at least heard of Beyonce, right? She has an album called I Am Sasha Fierce. If you know Beyonce's backstory, she was raised in, I think it was a Southern conservative Baptist home, where it just doesn't really fly with you need to go out there and dance and sometimes wear provocative clothing. So she needed a way to actually step into something that was going to allow her to be the best version of herself. So she created Sasha Fierce. And then, I mean, hand in hand with Bo Jackson and Beyonce, there's Scott Welle as well. I mean, I'm like right there with them. But you would probably never know this now, but dating all the way back to early on in grade school and in junior high, I had a horrible stutter. Like, I spent years in speech therapy. Public speaking was like the most feared thing. I would never want to be a public speaker. And when I first started speaking, I got asked to keynote and to do large conferences. There was a part of me that was worried about what will people think, and will I start to stutter? So Michael Jordan was one of my favorite athletes growing up, where I really looked at him and I just said, I need to go out there and I need to be okay with going out there and expressing myself fully. And I still have his book, I Can't Accept Not Trying, by my bedside. That's just a way of going out there and, again, showing the best version of myself. All of these people use alter egos, and the reason that I bring this up is for what you do as project managers, it might just be, especially with what Daniel Pink was talking about, your very perception of persuasion and sales, like that might not be that comfortable to you. But I guarantee that there are specific areas of what you do that are like, well, I need to do that for my job, but I know I could be doing a little bit better. And what I'm actually telling you is that as you start to do that, go into it and don't necessarily go into it as you. Go into it as someone that is an enhanced, better version of you. Go up and will do these things. So what you do, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time, but I'd be more than willing to send this to, maybe it's already online, I'm not sure, and you can just download it, but I'd be more than willing to send this to you. But as far as mapping out all of your alter ego, what you would do is you would just say, in what situations do I need this? Sort of like Bo Jackson on a football field, Beyonce on a stage, Scott Welle speaking. Like, what are the specific situations that are just a little bit uncomfortable for me as far as what I'm doing? What characteristics do they possess? You can give your alter ego a name, and then different things like, what will my alter ego never do? These things really matter. So everybody got their pictures taken? I almost don't want to click off it. And then to go into how you actually do this, great example, you need to create a trigger that initiates the transition. So a trigger, simple way, how many of you watched the Masters last weekend? Okay, well, many of you at least know that Tiger Woods won it, right? An outfit can be an incredibly powerful thing to bring out an alter ego. Tiger wears red on Sundays. It's his game day outfit. You can look at it as a song that generates something. You can also look at it as an action. Some of the people that I've worked with, maybe it's their commute or something where they will step from their car, and when they actually step through the doors of a certain area, then they come into that version of themselves that they need to be able to be their best. So I hope your imagination is still with me, because I am actually telling you that this is a massively powerful strategy to help us all get past any of the insecurities, the fears, the worries, the judgments, and it's necessary for the psychology of peak performance. So I know that I'm just about out of time. A couple of things. So if you would like access to, I've created a whole list of resources for all of you that are based around project management, because I think this is the 7th chapter I've actually spoken for. If you want access to those resources, all you have to do is text the word outperform to 38470. You won't get a robocall from anything, and I won't text you back on that number. It's just a way for you to be able to get access to more resources that will help you outperform. If you don't understand what I mean texting a word to a number, you just give me your business card, and I will make sure that you have it. And the other thing I should say as well, because I assume all of you are probably in the morning keynote, ironically enough, I actually do sales training based on Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. If any of you do this, I will send along the full PowerPoint that I call the 6 pillars of persuasion, that if you're looking at raising your game in that area, it will help you. It's not something that I knew I was going to name, but I'll send that over to you. Oh, and I have a book signing after this as well. Outperform the Norm, my flagship book to help you. For those of you that raised your hands with sons or daughters that play sports, the latest book showing them how to perform better in sports and school and life is also available. So you can come see me there if you are interested. And the last thing that I'll say is all of you have a superhero within you. And again, common sense not always being common practice. Some of these things might have seemed really simple, but if you just commit to how you want to show up, think about your habits and routines and how you can be consistent doing it, connect to a deeper purpose as far as what you're doing, thrive through change in everything that you do, and then don't be afraid to really be courageous and really put your best foot forward and put yourself out there. I know you're going to outperform even more than you are now. So I really appreciate you having me here today. Thank you so much, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. Before everyone departs, I do have a couple of housekeeping items. Just as a reminder, the PDUs and information can be found in the app. And Scott, as a token of our gratitude for your time and your wonderful presentation, I would like to give you this gift on behalf of PMI Mile High Chapter. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good lunch.